Yeah, so I think that's kind of what happens with like every generation. Like they're taking like their own steps ahead. So what usually also happens with parents is that maybe they know about like LGBTQI plus identities, and they even know like how to use the correct names, pronouns, and stuff like that. But then they get mixed up. Like, okay, if you identify as female, how come you have like male clothes and male hairstyle and stuff like that? And that's how like they have like, is it like deconstructed like their own definitions, and they're creating
Mm-hmm.
them themselves. And that's how our like brain get like really mixed up, that okay, like what's happening here, that this is not aligned with how I perceive gender, and it shouldn't be, because they're making their own like gender expressions.
Hello, and welcome to Parenting for Thought, the podcast that talks about things parents want to know. And even if not, we're here anyways. For my third ever guest, I have Maarit Grönroos. If I said that halfway correct, I feel like I get a gold star.
Yeah, definitely you get a gold star. Yeah.
I'll make my one other Finnish friend very proud.
Yeah.
And we connected because we both follow the same business development strategist. So it was a value match from day one. And when I found out what Maarit does, I got really excited. And you're going to find out why in a sec once Maarit tells us what she does. But I don't even remember who reached out to who first. I think it was just like a melding of. I think it was just
it was
a melding.
A natural like collision in a good kind of way.
It was just like a melding of the minds, and we were like, we need to collab in whatever way two people can collaborate. We need to be doing that. So we wrote you all a blog post, and we're going to talk about that today. So Maarit, who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, so I'm Maarit Grönroos. I'm originally from Finland, and now I live in California, and I offer my coaching services wherever you have the internet connection. My background is as a clinical psychologist and a psychotherapist, and I'm specialized in gender, sexual, and relationship diversities. So think about like all things queer. Those are like my basic day and my life, and I love that. Yeah, so I especially help parents in supporting their queer teens or like gender questioning teens.
And anybody who knows me can understand why that's an immediate value match for me. You know, I've shared with a lot of folks, some of my background is I was raised evangelical Christian, and being non-binary or queer of any sort, it's not even that it wasn't, like, number one, it wasn't an option. And number two, I hadn't even heard of it. I didn't even know that non-binary existed until I was in my 30s. And then once I learned about it, I'm like, wow, that feels like really natural to me. Like that really resonates.
Yeah. And I'm so lucky about kids today because they have all the labels that they can sort of like go shopping with their identity. Okay, this is me, and this is me, and this is me, and this is the combination that I am. So they have much more tools than we had.
Oh, 100%. My niece has like a pronoun rotation. It's wonderful. And she'll correct me, you know, if it's a he day, he'll be like, he, I'll be like, yeah, got it. Wonderful.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful thing. And so what I really loved was how you are more supporting teenagers or parents with teens. And, you know, I'm typically supporting families with really young children.
Yeah.
And it's when we have parents who are empowered to make informed decisions about their parenting in early childhood, the way that links up in those teen years, man, and this is what our blog post was about, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like, what's the saying about that? Like, when you plant a seed, so then you get to harvest it later. So that's kind of what happens with like early childhood and like adolescence.
Absolutely. Everything that you do in early childhood leads to something later on. And this is a concept that I feel really strongly about, and is that you've got to look ahead and trace back to where you are and figure out then how to get there. And then it's so funny because I was talking to a friend of mine who's a therapist who was sharing how so much of the time he's looking back and figuring out how to help folks catch up to where they are. And so there's times for looking forward and times for looking behind.
Yeah. And actually what we really need to do like after those things is how to be like present in the moment and like be present with our kid, be present with our teen, and like cherish that moment, because that's what counts like in the end.
Well, and this is what I love. Poor parents, they can't do anything right? Because, sometimes you have to look behind, sometimes you have to look ahead, and then don't forget to be present in the moment, and don't forget this, don't forget that, and you're juggling so much. Don't worry.
Yeah, and there are so many demands, and that's what I usually like parents come to me that they feel like we usually have values alignment, like a really good values alignment, that they want to support their kid or their teen.
Yep.
And then they have like all of these demands in their head that I need to do this, I need to do that, I need to do all kinds of things. It's kind of that, you need to learn like a lot of stuff to support your like LGBTQIA plus teen or kid. But in the end, it's the love that counts and acceptance.
Every time, right? Because if you're leading with love, values shift and change over time. And this is something we discussed in our blog post. And, if you only have to go back a few generations until you're in the Victorian times where children were to be seen and not heard. And, specifically, obviously Western ideologies here, which you and I are both white Westerners. So this is our culture and we're speaking to people from our cultures. That wasn't so long ago. And since then, every generation that's parenting wants to do better than their parents did for them, and so on and so forth. And now here we are, where I feel like, my parents' generation was just starting to come around to the idea of, well, what if my kid is gay? Could I handle that? And many of that generation did get to a point where they're like, okay, like, fine, if my kid's gay, I'll deal. And now we have these much bigger conversations where kids are talking about pansexuality, bisexuality, gender fluidity. And I feel like the kids are almost, I think this is true for every generation, where the kids are ready to move on a lot faster than the parents are. But I almost wonder if the rift is growing larger because the conversations that the kids are ready to have are just exploding. They are leaps and bounds ahead of where me and my cohort were at that same age. I don't know if you've noticed anything like this.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of what happens with like every generation. Like there's taking like their own steps ahead. So what usually also happens with parents is that maybe they know about like LGBTQI plus identities, and they even know like how to use the correct names, pronouns, and stuff like that. But then they get mixed up like, okay, if you identify as female, how come you have like male clothes and male hairstyle and stuff like that? And that's how like they have like, is it like deconstructed like their own definitions, and they're creating them themselves. And that's how our like brain get like really mixed up that, okay, like what's happening here, that this is not aligned with how I perceive gender, and it shouldn't be, because they're making their own like gender expressions.
Can we just say mic drop? Yeah, I would love it if a parent watching this could walk away feeling empowered to let their kid come to their own conclusions. In the same way that parent was able to do at some point in their journey. For example, with me, I wasn't allowed to come to my own conclusions about gender and sexual identity and all of those things. They were not options. And I know that that's true for so many other people. Once I got away from those limitations and in my 30s, then I was able to step into this new understanding and have some realizations of my own about myself, about the world. And thank goodness the kids are doing it faster these days, so they don't have to go through that kind of hell that I know I went through and that a whole bunch of my friends all went through. So our parents, these older generations, they had those same experiences, but perhaps about different things. Maybe they realized, well, is it really so evil to have sex before marriage? Maybe that's what they were thinking about. Or is smoking cigarettes really so bad? Or smoking weed really so bad?
Yeah. So kind of like figuring out like what are your own values, and then usually when kids hit like puberty, so that's kind of like brings up that, okay, I used to have like my own path with this, like growing to be independent, and okay, these are my values. Maybe these are my parents' values, not mine actually. And what are the values that I want to uh like be aligned with when like bringing up my own teen?
Yeah, and I think that there's so much room. I love challenging the idea of black and white thinking in every possible way. I'm very into gray areas, and there's always room to marry the two, right? Like if a parent doesn't believe in any sort of gender fluidity or any sexual orientation other than being hetero, if that works for that individual, they can hold that belief true for themselves without holding it true for their child. Now, I would disagree with their personal value. That's not my personal value. But as long as they're not causing harm, as long as they're not trying to make other people share that same value, there's nothing wrong with having a personal value, even if everybody around you disagrees with it. But the damage that it can do to not allow your child to even explore the kind of value that they might want to have.
Yeah.
Maybe you can touch on this.
Yeah, and it's not only about like values, but it's about like, okay, how do you actually perceive the world? And what do you know about like what science says about this? And we will not like dive into that so much, but it's
That's
also
a huge
about like
conversation.
Yeah, but also about like how can you make room for your child to figure their own self out if you can't hold the space like in your own mind. And I feel that sometimes we like lie to ourselves that, okay, I feel like this, but then I can accept other people's like varying identities and genders and sexual orientations, but I feel like we really need to like meditate on those and self-reflect on those, because I feel that we really like in our behavior we show what we like feel is true for us.
I was just going to say, I wonder if we should discuss what does acceptance actually look like? Because it's not just the words. It's not just saying, yeah, I'm fine with people being gay or any type of queer. Acceptance means a lot more than that. And especially when it's around your children. You know, if it's some stranger you're on the street, acceptance looks very different than what acceptance looks like in your home with your child.
Yeah. So I think I have like this kind of like personal story about my own teenage years when I came out as bisexual or like pansexual, whatever you want to call it. So then I had this sort of like silent acceptance from my parents that, okay, like you can be whatever you want, but kind of like let's not make it a thing. So I was left like to manage it on my own. And I'm really like a deep thinker. So that was not a good choice. But they didn't know that. And I can like understand that. They came from a different generation. But this is kind of like the message that I want to send out. So it's not enough to say like in a neutral way that, hey, you're okay. It kind of sends the message that, okay, so you are like this, but I love you anyways. And that's not the message you want to send. Like it's not neutral.
I love you in spite of the fact.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah, because I feel like true acceptance is like, oh my God, I learned this like new exciting thing about like from you and about you. I love you because of that. I love you for that. I love that in you.
I also love to talk about how, do you know this phrase, what's good for the goose is not good for the gander?
Okay, you need to explain that a bit. Maybe you have an example.
So essentially what it means is, and then you'll have to tell me the equivalent Finnish phrase for this, but it's what it means is like what's good for one person is not good for the next.
Mm-hmm.
And the silent acceptance for you was not the right thing. But I would be willing to bet that there is some teenager out there where that would be the right thing. And this is where, folks like you and I, coaches, we can present parents with so many options of like, well, this is one way of showing acceptance. This is another way. And you've got to try these things out. You're the expert on your child. We're the experts on the subjects, on the development, on the behaviors, on the relationships. So we can give you 100 ideas, and then you need to go through and figure out which one is correct for your situations.
Yeah. And some parents really do have like a really sensitive and gentle way of showing like actual acceptance. Like they buy the right books and like throw them around in the living room. They like buy queer art, or they take like their kids into like queer coffee shops or stuff like that. So there are like all kinds of things that you can do, or like share like queer social media, like information posts. So it's not about like actual like what do you like say and what kind of conversations you have. Like it's about like everything else as well.
Absolutely. There's for sure you've heard this phrase, actions speak louder than words.
Yeah. Definitely. So true.
And there's so many ways to show acceptance, right? And I love this idea of buying queer art and buying books on queerness and just kind of filling the home in subtle but meaningful ways with things that broaden the horizon. And, if leave it to your kid to start the conversation. Again, parents, your kids better than we know your kids. If your kid is the kind who can start the conversation on their own, or who needs a lot of time to warm up, these subtle ways are really beautiful. Or if your kid is the conversation starter, or can handle you coming right at them and saying, what the heck is up with this non-binary? Like, teach me things. Like, child, you teach me, because for sure you know more about this than I do. What a great way to just break down some walls and let your kids show off what they know, and then dive in with them.
Yeah. And I feel like the actual challenge is like, how can parents like self-regulate when they're hearing stuff for the first time? So how can they like take a deep breath and be like, okay, I have 2 ears, 1 mouth. They should be used in that proportion.
Well, I mean, I think it's for folks who aren't necessarily ready for, this big topic of queerness with their child. I imagine it feels perhaps equivalent to their child coming home and saying like, oh, I tried cocaine last night. It might feel really shocking, and it might be very jarring, and an opportunity for everybody to explore what their values are and what this means. And, perhaps if we could even help somebody to shift from a fearful mindset to an inquisitive one. I love to tell parents to get curious.
Yeah, that was the word that was in my mind also.
Yeah.
And like kind of have this kind of like realization with yourself that, okay, my kid did not try cocaine. That was not what happened. The kid did nothing illegal. He or she or they were just exploring themselves. They found out something new. They're curious about their genders. They're curious about their sexual orientation. What a wonderful thing. Like they're curious about themselves. Like that's the very basis of like mental well-being, like being curious and open to yourself and your feelings.
Love that. I love that. So to bring it into early childhood for a moment, you shared these great ideas about books and art. Parents of young kids, you can be doing exactly the same thing. There are so many books out there. And, it occurs to me, I should link those to this podcast recording so parents can find that. There are so many books that cover so many topics. It is so totally okay to be talking about gender and sexuality with your teeny tiny tot. They're ready for these things. Now, there's no need to get into the weeds about how people have sex. That's not the conversation that they're ready for. That's what your teenager's ready for. But your really young children.
In an age appropriate way.
Exactly. Let the books, let the people who wrote the books do the heavy lifting for you.
Yeah.
Get the book, read it with your kid. And then one of my favorite things to tell parents to ask their child, what do you think about that?
Yeah. Like such a simple question, and it opens so many doors.
Your kid will ask you what they're ready to ask you. There are 3-year-olds, and again, what's good for the goose is not good for the gander. Different 3-year-olds will ask different questions. Some might not ask any questions, but some might ask, well, why did this kid do that in this story? Or, well, why did this person behave this way in this story? Dive in, talk with your kid about it, and let them show you what their interest level is, what they're ready for, what's happening in their mind. Because, anybody who's had a kid knows that, this kids come out with their own opinions pretty fast.
Yeah, they do. And I'm really thinking about like all kind of like storybooks that are there for like kids, especially in English, like so many more books than in Finnish. So I'm really thinking about like sometimes parents get like kind of tired, like reading the same story like over and over again. But I want to tell you that there's a point in that, like the kid is processing something in that particular story. And that's like super important for their development. So if the kid asks like the same story like dozens and dozens of times, like take a deep breath and do go back again and again to that particular story because it has something like super precious for your kid.
Well said. Thank you for what a beautiful moment for our listeners. I love that. So this topic of queerness and accepting queer kids, that's big, right? And you even talked about the self-regulation for the adults. So we talked about this in our blog post too, emotional intelligence in the home. And this is the bulk of the work that I do with parents, right? It's teaching them emotional intelligence, language, teaching them how to honor everybody's emotions in the home, including their own, very especially their own.
Yeah.
And how this leads to the ability to discuss tough topics as your children grow.
Yeah. I feel like parents have like a difficult task in their hands, like at their hands, especially with teenagers, like, okay, or the same with toddlers, I reckon, because the kids or teens have like huge emotions and they're right there, like at your face, like in that very moment. And then it's the time for the parent to like, okay, I did have my emotions, like my own emotions, but they're going on a shelf now and they're going to live there for a while. And I'm making room, like being a container for my child's emotions, no matter if the child is like a toddler or a teenager. And I'm taking in all of their emotions and their like emotional turmoil. And then after those moments, after those discussions and being present in the moment, I will go back to my own shelf of emotions, take my emotions and be with my own emotions. So it's usually like how to make that process happen and how to like recognize your own feelings and emotions and how to name them, because usually like pinpointing them with a name, that usually helps a ton. I wonder if you've noticed the same, probably.
Every time. I am the biggest fan of an emotions wheel.
Yeah.
It's never just anger or sadness or happiness. Yeah. It's always something more specific
there's
than
like
that.
A spectrum.
A huge one. and very, very nuanced. And yeah, I mean, toddlers versus teens, who's to say which set of hormones is more difficult, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I loved as well what we talked about in our blog about how the teenage years can be this kind of second chance. So, you know, we might have listeners whose kids are 9, 10, 11 years old. They're getting into, you know, pre-puberty times, into the early teens even. And they're going, well, I didn't know about all this stuff back then. And maybe I said overtly homophobic or, you know, genderphobic stuff. And I've done the damage. Sure, damage has been done, and it is never too late.
Yeah. So damage can also be repaired. Like, it's kind of like you have to be like really, like, have empathy with yourself. Like, you did the best that you could in that particular situation in your life. And now with the teenager, you have the second chance. So take that time and acknowledge that, okay, I did some things that might have done damage. But okay, I'm like kind of like reflecting on those. And now I can make like better choices. I have more information now. And I feel the challenge is usually like parents maybe don't want to feel shame. Like, they can feel ashamed that, okay, I did so much damage, like, oh no. And yeah, that's not the thing. Like, feel empathy towards yourself and say that, yeah, I know that this happened, but I'm okay with that. I'm not a perfect human being. And that's actually what our kids need to see, that we're not perfect. And then moving forward to like, okay, what are the better choices that I want to make now? And then actively making those in our behavior.
Beautifully said, Maarit. Thank you. So if there was one thing, Maarit, that you wish that someone would walk away today knowing, what would it be?
Well, I kind of want to say that, especially with like genderqueer like teenagers, like, because somehow, like, sometimes it feels, for especially for parents, that it's about the pronouns. And I want to say at the same time that yes, it is about using the correct pronouns, but it's also not, like, totally not about the pronouns. Because those are words, and okay, they are important, like very important, but there's something even more important, and that's like the connection. Like, how does your teen feel when they're interacting with you? Do they feel safe? Do they feel loved, accepted, honored, respected? And that's a thing that matters. So when, not if, but when you will make mistakes with pronouns, I'm doing them like all the time, especially with the different language. So that happens. So then don't focus on yourself and be like, oh no, I made a mistake, I'm so sorry, so sorry, so sorry, this was because blah, 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 blah. And then it becomes like all about you. So notice that you made a mistake. Ask that, okay, I'm sorry, he, she, yeah, that's what I meant. And then carry on with the actual conversation that was going on, because that was about your teen. It was not about you. And if you want to feel that shame, then go have it on your own time, not your kids' time.
Maarit, we need to already book episode 2 together.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to do that.
And we can have a whole half-hour talk about pronouns just by itself. That's such an important one. That's such a good one. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I love our collaboration.
I can't wait for the next thing.
Yeah, me too.